Across billions of years, intelligence has taken countless forms. Quiet responses in ancient oceans, the steady routines of early reptiles, the warm quickening of mammalian minds, and the reflective spark that would one day wonder about itself. Hello there, and welcome to the Late Night Scientist channel. In this calm journey through deep time, we'll explore how thinking evolved, from simple reactions to shared wisdom, planning, teaching, and the unfolding diversity of minds that fill our world today. Settle in, breathe deeply, and drift with us through the story of how life learned to think. In the beginning, the world was quiet in a way that is almost impossible to imagine now. There were no footsteps, no wings cutting through air, no rustling of leaves. There weren't even leaves yet, just an ancient ocean stretching endlessly beneath a sky still new to its own blue. It was a time before thought existed in any recognizable form. Life, such as it was, drifted gently through the warm, mineral-rich shallows of the early Earth, obeying the simple rules of chemistry long before evolution experimented with anything resembling intelligence. The first organisms were tiny, far too small to notice without a microscope, and far too focused on existing to worry about anything so extravagant as thinking. These early cells floated like dust motes in a sunbeam, carried by currents that moved at their own patient pace. And yet, inside these microscopic pioneers, something important was happening. Reactions were responding to other reactions. Molecules nudged other molecules. Ion channels flickered open or closed. Proteins folded, bumped, and changed shapes depending on what drifted near. It was a world of exquisite simplicity, but also of remarkable potential. In these early seas, being alive meant reacting. A single-celled organism could sense in its subtle chemical way the difference between a place with more nutrients and a place with fewer. When the concentration of food molecules increased, the cell's internal machinery hummed in quiet agreement, continuing its slow dance of metabolism. When the food thinned out, the machinery complained, gently but insistently, and the cell drifted onward, seeking a better patch. It wasn't choosing exactly, but it was responding. A difference that small seems trivial now, but in the long conversation between life and its environment, this was one of the first true syllables. The ocean around them was warm and somewhat unpredictable, stirred by volcanic vents releasing minerals and heat. These vents created gradients, tiny landscapes of chemistry, where conditions changed from spot to spot. Early life did not explore these gradients the way an animal might explore a forest. It simply drifted into them and reacted. But every reaction, every subtle shift of direction, every variation in movement, was a hint of something that would someday become decision-making. If intelligence could be distilled to its most essential drop, it might taste like this: move toward what helps, drift away from what harms. A simple rule, but one upon which everything else would someday be built. Without brains, without nerves, and without organs, these first organisms still carried within them the seeds of responsiveness. A beam of light, faint and filtered through ancient seawater, could trigger a change in the cell's orientation. Heat rising from the crust encouraged them to move toward warmth that improved their biochemical reactions. Some moved in lazy spirals, others gently wiggled in uneven patterns that made them tumble slowly through space. These motions were not plans, they were not strategies, but they were not random either. They were the earliest whispers of what would, billions of years later, become complex behavior. And in this slow, ancient world, being able to shift ever so slightly to the left instead of the right was enough to matter. Life's first choice, if we can gift it that generous name, was not dramatic. It was not heroic. It was simply a faint inclination in a particular direction, a soft chemical suggestion made by the environment and obeyed by the cell. But evolution, being patient and endlessly attentive, kept those suggestions that helped and let the rest drift quietly into extinction. There is a strange elegance in imagining a world where survival depended on nothing more than how a cell's membrane responded to a passing molecule. There were no predators yet, no competition in the sense we understand now. Everything happened slowly, carried by the tides and stirred by the heat of young Earth. And yet, in this gentle, drifting existence, the foundation of every future mind was being laid. The systems that would someday allow creatures to navigate forests, hunt across plains, and ponder their own existence began here, in this dimly lit, microscopic world. These early cells were not aware of their own survival. They were not contemplating the meaning of drifting toward nutrients. They were simply responding because that was how they functioned. Still, their tiny acts of responsiveness shaped the planet in ways they could never intend. They helped oxygenate the atmosphere, created mats and colonies that altered currents, and began the slow transformation of Earth into a place where thought could one day flourish. If we were to picture one of these early microbes making its way through that ancient ocean, we might be tempted to imagine it determined, purposeful, perhaps even proud of its survival. But that would be giving it far too much credit. Its existence was humble, reactive, and blissfully free of contemplation. Its greatest achievement was managing not to dissolve. Yet, in its quiet persistence, it carried the spark that would ignite all future complexities. In the darkness of deep time, where silence stretched in every direction, life began not with thought, but with response. A simple turning, a gentle drift, a chemical murmur. Intelligence in all its future splendor would someday trace its lineage back to these earliest motions, back to these tiny cells that decided, in the softest way possible, to move ever so slightly toward what kept them alive. The Ediacaran world was a realm of soft bodies and slow movements, where life's earliest experiments in complexity unfolded in silence beneath gentle waves. Here, in broad, shallow seas, creatures sprawled across the sea floor like living tapestries, flat, frond-like, quilt-patterned beings that drifted, pulsed, and fed in ways no modern animal quite resembles. It was a world so different from our own that even imagination must move slowly to follow it. And within these drifting shapes, something quietly revolutionary was beginning to unfold: the first nervous systems. Before this point, life had survived by relying almost entirely on chemistry, internal reactions rising and falling like tiny tides. But chemistry alone is slow, and as bodies grew larger, more layered, and more complex, they needed a way to coordinate themselves. A millimeter-sized microbe drifting in ancient seas had no trouble keeping its reactions in sync. But a creature with a body spanning several centimeters, or in some cases, nearly a meter across, needed a faster way to relay information from one side of itself to the other. And so evolution, with its usual unhurried inventiveness, wove together the earliest networks of nerves. These first nerve nets were astonishingly simple, but for their time, they were radical. They formed loose, interconnected webs stretching across soft bodies, like constellations sketched by a sky that had just learned to draw. These nets did not form brains, not even clusters really, but instead spread their signals evenly, allowing the entire organism to sense and respond in one unified ripple. Touch the edge of one of these early animals, and a wave of contraction would travel outward, not because any single place decided to respond, but because the whole organism reacted as an interconnected sheet of sensation. This responsiveness marked a subtle shift in the way life behaved. The earliest organisms, drifting freely in ancient seas, could do little more than nudge themselves chemically toward or away from something. But now, animals, true animals, could contract their bodies, ripple their surfaces, or slowly glide across soft sediments using coordinated movements. They were still slow, still gentle in their intentions, but they possessed a new kind of unity. Their bodies were no longer bags of chemistry. They were networks. The Ediacaran seas were filled with creatures of remarkable shapes. Some radiated outward like discs, others folded like soft quilts, and still others stood upright like feathery fronds anchored into the sediment. Many of these forms remain mysterious today, leaving scientists to decode their lifestyles from subtle impressions in stone. But what becomes clearer with each discovery is that these organisms were experimenting with coordination. They needed to distribute information through their bodies to maintain shape, to respond to currents, and to react to changes in their immediate environment. Without a nervous system, such coordination would have been impossible. A nerve net didn't merely transmit signals, it provided a sense of here and there, even if only in the faintest biological whisper. When a ripple of water brushed one side of the body, the nerve net could propagate a contraction that moved across the entire being. While these motions were often slow, they represented a major step in the story of intelligence, the ability to respond in more than one place at once. The organism might pulse upward slightly, or flatten itself against the seafloor, or curl inward just a little. None of these movements required a decision. They were automatic, born from the architecture of the net itself. The beauty of this system lay in its simplicity. There was no hierarchy, no central command center issuing instructions. Instead, information flowed like a wave through a pond, with each node in the network helping to carry the signal. This decentralization meant the animals were resilient. Damage to one area didn't incapacitate them. Their intelligence, if we can stretch the term gently, was everywhere at once, diffused evenly like twilight across an ancient sea. In this era, being able to contract even a few centimeters of tissue at the right moment could be the difference between being disturbed by a current or staying comfortably anchored in nutrient-rich sediments. Though predators, as we know them, had not yet arrived, the ocean was never perfectly still. Storms sent soft turbulence through the shallows. Shifting sands covered and uncovered patches of microbial films that some Ediacaran creatures grazed upon. A nerve net allowed these early animals to adjust, slowly but effectively, to small changes in the world around them. Their responses were mechanical, reflexive, and entirely unconscious, but they were coordinated in a way the earlier chemical-driven life could never have achieved. One might imagine that possessing a nervous system would introduce a measure of worry into life, but these early creatures were blissfully free of such burdens. Their signals traveled without urgency. Their movements unfolded in leisurely ripples, and the challenges they faced were modest. Though they had nerves, they had very little to be nervous about. A fortunate arrangement, since the nerve nets themselves were not capable of worry in any recognizable sense. Still, in their quiet, drifting existence, These animals laid the groundwork for everything that would come after. Every future brain, every burst of thought, every spark of curiosity owed something to these early networks, where signals first learned to travel along biological pathways. The nerve nets did not think, but they allowed bodies to act. They allowed sensitivity to spread, reactions to flow more swiftly, and life to coordinate itself in ways that were more than chemical, yet less than conscious. And so, in the Ediacaran seas, intelligence took its first structural step. Not a thought, not a decision, but a signal. A message passing from one cell to another in a soft-bodied creature that knew nothing and needed nothing more than to move just slightly when the world touched it. The Cambrian seas opened like a curtain on a world suddenly awake. After the long, drifting calm of the Ediacaran, the early Cambrian was a renaissance of motion, an era where life acquired new edges, new limbs, and new ambitions. The ocean floor, once a quiet carpet of soft-bodied creatures, now shimmered with the quick flicker of movement. Eyes, simple but growing sharper, glimmered under the filtered sunlight. Muscles tensed, shells flexed, and bodies carved through the water with speed the ancient earth had never seen before. In this newfound commotion, one evolutionary innovation became desperately important: the ability to coordinate it all. The first brains emerged not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. The moment predators entered the picture, being slow to respond became an immediate invitation to extinction. A creature that once only needed to sense a gentle current now had to interpret the approach of a jaw-like structure, or the sudden pressure wave of a swift-moving hunter. And so evolution began gathering neurons, once spread loosely through nerve nets, into small clusters, like sparks collecting into a single, brighter flame. These clusters did not resemble the grand, folded brains that would appear hundreds of millions of years later. They were modest, simple structures, tiny control centers barely more organized than the networks they came from. But what they lacked in sophistication, they made up for in speed. Signals that once meandered through body-wide webs could now shoot directly into a centralized hub, be processed quickly, and fire outward with decisive clarity. In the Cambrian world, clarity meant survival. The creatures that benefited most from this innovation were those that could react quickly: early arthropods, worm-like predators, and small swimmers with newly evolved muscles arranged in clever patterns. Their lives were shaped by the split-second clashes of a new ecological stage, where hunting and fleeing became everyday events rather than rare accidents. A brain, even a primitive one, offered a way to interpret sensory information fast enough to matter. Vision began improving around this time, too. Not complex vision, not yet, but eyes now captured sharper differences in light, motion, and shape. These were no longer simple patches of photoreceptive cells. They were directional, structured. They gave early animals the ability to tell whether something was approaching from the left, the right, or directly ahead. Information that demanded a coordinating center capable of making sense of it. And so the first brains didn't emerge as intellectual engines. They formed as interpretive switches, distilling sensory chaos into simple instructions: twist, dart, freeze, or flee. Movement became more purposeful in these newly competitive seas. Small, segmented creatures like early arthropods developed jointed appendages that moved in coordinated patterns. Wriggling ancestors of vertebrates developed notochords, flexible rods that allowed more rhythmic, efficient swimming. These changes required a conductor, however humble, to keep them synchronized. A brain provided that conductor's baton, ensuring that a flick of a tail or a snap of a limb happened at precisely the right moment. The seafloor was now a stage filled with players whose interactions were faster and sharper than anything before. One animal might lunge forward using a sudden contraction of muscles, while another torpedoed away in a burst of escape reflex. This was the age when being able to interpret a ripple of water correctly, not too late, not too slowly, meant life. And so intelligence, in its earliest form, became tightly bound to reaction time. It was not yet reflective or curious. It was a mechanism for survival in a world that had become unpredictable. Creatures with centralized nerves could link multiple senses together. A sudden shadow paired with a pressure shift meant danger. The sensation of vibration paired with the shape of a moving object meant opportunity. These associations weren't learned. They were wired. Natural selection etched them into neural circuits through countless generations. Many Cambrian animals lived short lives, but their nervous systems evolved rapidly, optimizing the simple decisions that made the difference between reproducing and becoming another creature's meal. Amid this arms race, certain predators became astonishingly efficient. Some developed spiny limbs for grasping. Others evolved circular, jaw-like structures that snapped shut with unsettling precision. These animals did not think ahead so much as react ahead, their tiny brains predicting just enough movement to intercept prey. For prey species, meanwhile, survival meant detecting the faintest hint of danger and disappearing into the sand or jetting away before the predator made contact. In this era, thinking ahead meant surviving the next 5 seconds, and that was ambitious enough. The ocean itself played along with this newfound urgency. Currents carried scents and vibrations farther than before, giving both hunters and hunted ample signals to interpret. Coral-like structures and emerging microbial reefs created hiding places and ambush points, adding complexity to life's interactions. Every rock, every shadow, every drifting particle could hold meaning or peril. Yet for all this pressure, the Cambrian world was also astonishingly creative. Evolution was experimenting, and though many designs vanished quickly, the blueprint of a centralized nervous system persisted. It was too useful, too effective, too adaptable to disappear. The first brains set the stage for behaviors that would one day include memory, learning, curiosity, and problem-solving. But here, in their earliest form, they existed as rapid response centers in a bustling sea of movement and danger. In the quiet prelude of earlier eras, life had drifted with the currents. Now, in these vibrant Cambrian waters, life darted, surged, and leapt. Signals raced along newly formed pathways. Bodies coordinated their movements with precision, and tiny brains, barely more than neural knots, began shaping the future of intelligence, one rapid impulse at a time. The world of the Cambrian had already grown busy, but as the Ordovician dawned, a new kind of awareness began to ripple through the oceans, an awareness sculpted by light. Vision, once little more than the ability to sense brightness, now blossomed into something richer. Eyes gained lenses, deepened into cups, and developed layered tissues capable of forming crude but meaningful images. And the moment creatures could see the world rather than merely notice it, life entered a new chapter, the age of aiming. The oceans themselves had changed. Water clarity improved in many regions, sunlight reached deeper, and the growing diversity of bodies, shells, limbs, fins, fronds, added shape and contrast to the underwater landscape. Shadows lengthened and sharpened. Movement cast shimmering patterns that carried information beyond the reach of smell or touch. With clearer vision came clearer consequences. Predators could spot prey from farther away, and prey could detect danger sooner. But both now needed to make sense of these patterns quickly enough to act, and that demanded something more than a reflex. It required spatial thinking. Early image-forming eyes did not show their owners crisp, high-resolution scenes. Instead, these eyes offered blurry but useful silhouettes, patches of light and dark that hinted at edges, angles, and motion. For the first time, an animal could perceive direction not just as a pressure wave, but as a shifting point of contrast. A looming shape meant something was approaching. A speck that grew larger meant it was approaching quickly. A speck that grew larger and changed angle meant the creature needed to pick a new escape route. This subtle interpretation was not yet thought, but it was an early form of prediction. A brain, now slightly more developed, with more neurons clustered near the sensory organs, could compare the last moment's image to the current one. It could detect that a shape had moved left or right, that it had brightened or dimmed, that its edge had become more defined. From these small changes came the beginnings of understanding where something would be a moment from now. This was the era when intelligence stretched a few milliseconds into the future. Prey animals, often soft-bodied or lightly armored, learned to evade with greater elegance. Some shot backward in sharp bursts when a shadow crept too close. Others pitched their bodies downward, disappearing behind small ridges of sediment, or tucked themselves into newly evolved shells. This new dance between hunters and hunted required more than speed. It required aiming. Even to flee in the right direction, a creature had to know which direction danger approached from. Predators, meanwhile, became more deliberate. They no longer lunged blindly toward a disturbance. They could track a moving outline, time their strike, and adjust their approach mid-swim. A few early hunters evolved stalk-like eyes that rose above their bodies, offering a wider field of view, useful for spotting prey hidden along the seafloor. Others developed compound eyes capable of detecting flickers and motion with astonishing clarity. Each visual innovation demanded corresponding neural improvements, more circuits to handle more information, more processing to sort signal from noise. The world began to acquire depth, and with depth came a profound shift in behavior. Animals learned to navigate not just along the seafloor, but through layers of water. A creature could rise slightly into the water column to scout for food or drop lower to hide against darker sediment. Depth perception was still crude, but it allowed animals to understand that objects changed in size depending on distance. This basic spatial logic supported more refined strategies: sneaking from below, ambushing from above, blending into the substrate at just the right angle. For the first time, habitat complexity truly mattered. Rocky reefs, once merely obstacles to swim around, became elaborate three-dimensional landscapes with corners and sightlines. Animals hid behind sponges, slipped into crevices, or used shadows cast by early coral-like structures to mask their silhouettes. Life learned not only to move, but to position itself. Of course, clearer vision had its drawbacks. Seeing too well meant noticing more than was strictly necessary. Floating debris, harmless shadows, the way your own flickering limbs distorted the light. Some creatures likely wasted milliseconds reacting to things that, in retrospect, did not matter. But intelligence is rarely efficient at first. It stumbles, startles, overreacts. Seeing clearly turned out to be both a gift and an inconvenience. useful for avoiding predators, less useful when every drifting particle seemed suspicious. As eyes improved, behavior diversified. Some species adopted patient hunting methods, waiting motionless until prey wandered close enough to strike. Others became active chasers, pursuing targets with newfound confidence. A few evolved symmetrical bodies that swam straight, an advantage when lining up a precise approach. Even feeding strategies changed. Creatures could now aim their mouthparts with more accuracy, grasping or filtering food more efficiently. The Ordovician also brought larger-scale transformations. Seas deepened, continents shifted, and planktonic life flourished, clouding some waters while clearing others. In regions with clearer water, vision drove evolution rapidly. In murkier regions, other senses still dominated, but even there, rudimentary eyes offered an advantage. Everywhere, animals were learning to interpret space, not only as the place they inhabited, but as a dimension filled with opportunities and dangers moving in predictable ways. The small neural hubs that processed visual information began to expand. They developed more specialized zones, tiny, early versions of what would someday become complex sensory regions. Though still simple, these brains had grown beyond mere reflex centers. They could filter stimuli, prioritize information, and shape responses based on the relative position of objects. The world was no longer a flat backdrop of touch and vibration. It was a three-dimensional stage filled with shifting relationships. And in that unfolding complexity, intelligence took its next step, discovering that survival depended not just on reacting, but on anticipating, on learning where something was moving, and meeting that moment with precision. It was an era when the ocean gained shapes and angles, when shadows mattered, and when every flick of movement carried meaning. Life had learned to aim, and once it did, the world would never again feel flat. As the Ordovician seas matured and the Silurian quietly approached, the world beneath the waves became more than just a place of motion and light. It became a place of consequences. Life could move, hide, chase, and aim, but these behaviors alone were not enough to navigate a world growing steadily more intricate. Coral-like reefs formed tangled labyrinths, predators refined their strategies, and prey developed new defensive tricks. The oceans were evolving into ecosystems layered with nuance, and navigating such complexity required more than quick reflexes. It required the faintest beginnings of memory. Memory, at its origin, was not a conscious story or a vivid replay of experience. It began as a physical change, a strengthening of pathways in tiny clusters of neurons when certain behaviors succeeded. If an animal fled in the right direction and survived, the neural circuits that fired during that escape became slightly more efficient. If it ventured too close to a hazard and suffered for it, the circuits involved in approaching that direction weakened or rerouted. This was not learning in the reflective sense, but learning as the nervous system's quiet way of saying, "Let's not do that again." The Ordovician oceans offered plenty of opportunities for such adjustments. Predators grew faster and more agile, developing jaws with increased precision or limbs capable of sudden bursts of motion. Prey species responded with their own upgrades, harder shells, quicker retreats, and more complex methods of disguise. As interactions escalated, the animals that could subtly alter their future behavior based on earlier outcomes gained a small but decisive edge. A creature that repeatedly bumped itself against a stinging organism might gradually refine its swimming path to avoid that patch of the seafloor. Another that discovered a particularly rich feeding ground might linger in similar environments in the future. These shifts were not deliberate. The animals did not remember in the human sense. Instead, Their brains formed slightly improved routes for electrical signals to flow, tiny guidance systems etched by experience rather than reason. In some lineages, these neural improvements took on remarkable forms. Slow-moving grazers learned to follow trails left by their own species, recognizing faint chemical cues that indicated food had been found nearby. Early-jawed fish began adjusting the timing of their strikes based on the success of earlier hunts, landing their bites with growing accuracy. A few worm-like creatures learned to retreat into their burrows just a fraction of a second sooner after detecting vibrations, an interval small enough to matter in a world where danger could appear as a sudden shadow or a swiftly advancing pair of fins. In this era, life's greatest teacher was repetition. Behaviors that helped survival were reinforced through countless cycles: feeding, fleeing, hiding, searching. If a particular pattern produced good results, the neural connections involved became smoother, like a well-worn path through dense vegetation. If a pattern led repeatedly to trouble, evolution encouraged the nervous system to reroute its signals, subtly discouraging that behavior. Intelligence was expanding, not through new organs or sudden leaps, but through time. Tiny increments of experience accumulating to influence future actions. This form of memory did not require self-awareness. It did not ask animals to relive their past or question their choices. It simply rewarded efficient behavior and discouraged inefficient alternatives. Evolution quietly discovered that forgetting everything was inefficient, and so it began to save what mattered most. A creature that remembered, even faintly, that certain patterns signaled danger had a better chance of surviving long enough to pass on its traits. The development of memory also allowed species to explore new behaviors. When small variations in movement or feeding yielded success, those benefits could be retained, shaping the individual and eventually the lineage. A fish that learned to lurk near a particular type of coral might discover more prey. A burrowing creature that experimented with a deeper retreat angle might avoid detection more often. These incremental adjustments accumulated into new strategies, ones refined not only by evolution's slow hand, but by the animal's own neural tendencies. With memory came the subtle beginnings of individuality. Two creatures of the same species, born identical in design, might diverge slightly in their behavior depending on their early experiences. One might develop a tendency to patrol the edges of a reef, while another preferred the safety of its interior passages. These were not personalities, not yet, but they were the first hints that life could shape itself within the boundaries of its biology. Meanwhile, habitats continued to evolve. The Silurian welcomed the expansion of complex reef systems and the stabilization of shallow marine environments. With more structure came more opportunities for learning. Intricate hiding spots, shifting light patterns, and varied feeding zones required creatures to refine how they navigated the world. Memory became the silent partner of motion, guiding animals through corridors of rock and shadow with gradually improved efficiency. Predators, too, benefited from memory. A hunter that repeatedly failed when approaching from one angle might, through neural reinforcement, attempt a different angle the next time. This wasn't planning. It was simply the nervous system adjusting its own likelihoods. Yet to outside observers, these tiny shifts appeared purposeful. Life was beginning to look as though it understood things, even though understanding remained far in the future. In these ancient waters, intelligence stretched, for the first time, beyond the immediate moment. The nervous system began to carry the faint imprint of what had happened before, influencing what would happen next. No creature knew it was remembering, but its survival increasingly depended on those small, enduring traces. Memory, even in this humble biological form, became a bridge connecting past and future. And once life took its first steps along that bridge, the path of intelligence widened, deepened, and began its long journey toward minds that would one day reflect on the very origins of memory itself. The Devonian world shimmered with possibility. Forests of tall, primitive plants rose along shorelines, their fronds swaying in breezes no marine creature had ever felt. Rivers wound through landscapes rich with new textures: mud, sand, pebbles, fallen stems, each offering challenges entirely foreign to the countless generations that had lived and died beneath the comfort of buoyant water. And at the edge of these waterways, some animals began to test the boundary between sea and land. With each hesitant emergence, intelligence itself shifted, adapting to a world that offered both unimaginable opportunity and an impressive list of hazards. For life that had spent hundreds of millions of years cradled by the ocean's supportive lift, stepping onto land was not a graceful moment. Water had always carried weight, rendered movement fluid, and softened every fall. On land, gravity felt heavier and more judgmental. Early vertebrates, tetrapod ancestors equipped with stout fins strengthened by internal bones, found themselves wrestling with their own bodies in ways they had never needed to before. Limbs meant for paddling had to push against solid ground, not glide through fluid. Even lifting one's head required new muscles firing in coordinated patterns, guided by neural circuits unaccustomed to such demands. These first excursions onto land were brief, often desperate. Attempts to reach temporary pools, escape aquatic predators, or search for food in shallow margins. Yet each attempt introduced the nervous system to new forms of information. Instead of interpreting pressure waves or waterborne chemicals, animals had to process vibrations through the ground, shifting shadows cast across uneven terrain, and the unpredictable feel of surfaces that varied with each step. A mossy bank offered good traction. Smooth, wet stone did not. Soft mud could support a limb one moment and swallow it the next. Intelligence, already shaped by memory and spatial interpretation, now faced a new test. Integrating a chaotic mixture of unfamiliar sensory cues in real time. Coordinating limbs on land demanded more than strength. It required timing. A fin could push backward underwater in a continuous motion, but on land, limbs needed to lift, plant, and push in sequence. If they didn't, the animal toppled sideways like a poorly balanced stool. Many did topple repeatedly, but evolution is patient. Over generations, nerve circuits adapted to handle weight distribution, providing micro-adjustments to keep the body stable. Each small correction strengthened the neural pathways responsible for balance. In a sense, intelligence was learning to negotiate with gravity. Walking turned out to be surprisingly difficult, without water doing half the work. Muscles that once conserved energy through buoyancy now had to pull against the full resistance of the body's mass. This required more efficient neural signaling and tighter loops of coordination between sensory input and motor output. A creature needed to know where its limbs were, how far its body leaned, and whether the ground would support its next step. Land introduced imbalance, and imbalance demanded awareness. But the challenges of land were not limited to movement. Dryness threatened life at every moment. Gills collapsed outside water, so early tetrapods relied on lungs and skin for gas exchange, mechanisms that demanded careful regulation of moisture. The nervous system had to help the body recognize when conditions became too arid, prompting animals to retreat toward damper areas. Temperature also fluctuated more sharply on land than in water. Early explorers had to sense and respond to these changes, moving between sun-warmed rocks and shaded roots to maintain internal equilibrium. In doing so, they began to experience an environment that shifted dramatically over the course of a single day. Vision, too, changed in meaning on land. Underwater, visibility was limited by suspended particles, scattering light into soft, muted gradients. But on land, scenes were sharper, brighter, and filled with edges. Light behaved differently, more intense, more directional. Shadows took on new significance, indicating obstacles, elevations, or the sudden presence of something moving behind vegetation. Interpreting these cues required new layers of processing, distinguishing solid shapes from flickering reflections, judging distances with greater precision, and understanding that the world extended not just outward, but upward in towering vertical structures. Land plants introduced a new dimension to sensory experience. Early tetrapods encountered stems, leaves, and tangled roots, objects that required more detailed tactile interpretation than anything in the ocean. Brushing past a coarse stem produced different feedback than gliding over wet algae. The nervous system learned to categorize textures, aiding navigation and helping animals determine which surfaces offered safe support. And while predators on land were not yet numerous, the few that existed, such as large arthropods, added stress to these early pioneers. A creature that sensed vibrations from an approaching millipede-like predator needed to react differently than it would in water. Retreating into mud or sliding beneath plant debris became useful strategies, and these strategies depended on quick assessments formed from new sensory combinations. Still, despite its challenges, land offered rewards. Insects and other arthropods roamed early forests in abundance, forming rich food sources for those animals skilled enough to reach them. Pools and shallow streams became refuges where early tetrapods could bask, breathe, and rest between excursions. Those individuals whose nervous systems could interpret this strange new world even marginally better left more descendants, passing along the neural frameworks that supported coordinated terrestrial life. Over time, the neural circuits required for land-based movement grew more robust. Pathways that controlled limb placement, balance, and posture became increasingly refined. Animals began to move with more confidence, lifting themselves higher, pushing farther inland, exploring broader ranges of terrain. Intelligence, once shaped by drifting currents and reacting to waterborne signals, now evolved under the influence of surfaces, slopes, shadows, dryness, and the relentless pull of gravity. Stepping onto land did more than change where animals lived. It changed how they processed the world. The nervous system, forced into new challenges, became more capable, more integrative, and more adaptable. Land tested intelligence in ways the ocean never had, and in rising to meet those tests, the first terrestrial vertebrates laid the groundwork for every future creature that would walk, climb, leap, or run across the continents that followed. By the time the Carboniferous period shaded into the Permian, the land had transformed into a world of towering forests, shifting river channels, and wide sunlit stretches of open terrain. Amphibians had ventured far from the water's edge, but it was the reptiles, newcomers with dry adapted skins and sturdier eggs, that would define the next chapters of life on land. They emerged with bodies built for independence, lungs that handled dry air, limbs that lifted them clear of the ground, skins that resisted desiccation, and a quiet efficiency threaded through every movement. And inside these bodies, tucked behind bone and muscle, sat nervous systems that embodied the art of doing things well, consistently, and with very little fuss. Reptilian intelligence was not about curiosity or experimentation. It was about reliability. While early land vertebrates struggled with choices and clumsy adjustments, reptiles perfected routines, patterns of behavior honed by countless generations to fit the predictable rhythms of their world. Their brains were compact and deliberate, shaped to favor efficiency over novelty. Where other lineages might stumble upon new ideas or explore alternative strategies, reptiles mastered the logic of habit. If something worked yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that, it was probably worth doing again today. This form of intelligence thrived in the Carboniferous environment, where dense forests and humid swamps offered ample hiding spots and familiar pathways. A reptile could spend its life moving through nearly identical cycles of behavior, warming in the sun at dawn, hunting or foraging during the most advantageous part of the day, then retreating into shelter as temperatures dropped. These daily patterns were guided by instinct, but reinforced by experience. A sheltered log that consistently offered security became part of a repeated circuit. A cluster of vegetation that harbored insects or small vertebrates became a known stop on a habitual route. Through repetition, landscapes became cognitive maps, simple, dependable, and deeply ingrained. Reptiles did not need complex brains to manage these routines. Their nervous systems specialized in stable loops of perception and action. Sensory cues, shifts in temperature, subtle ground vibrations, the flicker of movement, triggered immediate and well-practiced responses. A rustle in the underbrush initiated a snap of jaws or a swift retreat. A warming rock invited a stillness that conserved energy and increased alertness. It was intelligence reduced to its essentials, swift, decisive, and perfectly tuned to environments that rewarded consistency. Unlike the exploratory tendencies that would later characterize mammals or the flighty awareness of future birds, reptilian cognition favored minimalism. Each neural circuit was designed to get the job done without unnecessary computation. In the Permian, as climates grew drier and landscapes opened into wide plains, this economical approach became even more advantageous. Reptiles expanded into arid environments where water was scarce and energy conservation mattered more than cleverness. Living in these conditions meant embracing dependable strategies, basking at optimal times, reducing movements when temperatures peaked, navigating along familiar routes, and feeding opportunistically rather than ambitiously. Their brains excelled at pattern recognition, especially patterns that repeated daily, seasonally, or predictably across the landscape. They learned to return to the same hunting ground, year after year, because the sunlit clearings reliably attracted insects. They learned that a particular patch of shade near a rock outcrop offered refuge at midday. These behavioral grooves became so stable that they formed the foundation of reptilian success. Do what works, do it precisely, and do it often. Habit-based intelligence did not lack sophistication. It simply expressed sophistication differently. Rather than constructing novel solutions, reptiles refined the solutions already encoded in their biology. Their brains strengthened pathways that worked consistently and trimmed away behaviors that wasted energy. The result was a mental architecture built like a well-organized toolkit. Few instruments, but each honed to reliability. Even their hunting strategies followed this pattern. Many reptiles favored ambush tactics, positioning themselves near known prey paths and striking with practiced speed. Others grazed or browsed in slow, methodical movements, trusting that patience and routine would provide what they needed. In both cases, the intelligence involved lay not in invention, but in optimization. A reptile rarely reinvented its approach. It perfected the one it had. This preference for dependable behavior extended to their interactions with the environment. Reptiles became sensitive to temperature gradients, learning where heat pooled on rocks, where it dissipated in evening breezes, and how to move between microhabitats to maintain ideal physiological states. Their daily lives became choreographed by sunlight and shadow, each shift triggering familiar patterns that guided them through the day. They were creatures of rhythm, tuned to cycles long before more flexible minds learned to improvise. The Permian era challenged all life with climate fluctuations, drying landscapes, and changing vegetation. Yet reptiles remained resilient precisely because their intelligence conserved energy rather than spending it on experimentation. Routine thinking allowed them to persist where others might exhaust themselves searching for alternatives. Their brains, steady, uncomplicated, and confident in repetition, were perfectly suited for a world demanding endurance rather than innovation. Of course, the gentle humor in all this is that reptilian minds became champions of doing the same thing very well, forever. Where future animals would analyze, compare, or strategize, reptiles found comfort in the familiar. They asked few questions of the world, and the world, most of the time, rewarded them for it. In their unhurried, predictable way, reptiles shaped the foundation for countless terrestrial ecosystems. Their quiet, rule-based intelligence may not have sparkled with creativity, but it provided stability during eras of shifting climates and expanding habitats. Habit, after all, can be a kind of wisdom, the wisdom of knowing that survival often belongs to those who master what works and keep doing it with unshakable consistency. The transition from the late Permian into the early Mesozoic was a crucible of extremes, a world reshaped by volcanic upheaval, shifting climates, and pressures that tested every lineage on land and in the sea. Amid this turbulence, a remarkable evolutionary shift began to take hold in certain groups of reptiles, a move toward generating their own internal heat. Endothermy, warm-bloodedness, did not arrive all at once, nor did it emerge with fanfare. But gradually, in a world recovering from catastrophe, warmth became a refuge, an engine, and eventually a catalyst for faster, sharper minds. Early endothermic creatures existed in landscapes where temperatures swung dramatically. Days could be searing, nights abruptly cold. For an ectotherm whose functioning hinged entirely on the environment's temperature, these fluctuations were challenging. Muscles stiffened at dawn, senses dulled in the chill, and activity often had to wait until the sun offered its permission. But creatures developing internal heat found themselves less beholden to the sky. They could begin their day earlier, remain active later, and operate in conditions that left their cold-blooded neighbors sluggish. This newfound warmth did more than lengthen their hours. It quickened everything within them. Metabolism moved faster, pushing energy through muscles with greater urgency. Oxygen circulated more efficiently. Movements sharpened. Sensory organs responded with heightened speed. And, perhaps most importantly, warm bodies allowed neural impulses to travel with unprecedented swiftness. A warm brain, it turns out, is a more talkative brain. Signals spark and flow through networks with greater tempo, allowing creatures to process information just a little faster than their competitors. At first, cognition didn't grow more complex. It simply accelerated. Animals didn't think differently, but they began thinking sooner. Where a cold-blooded reptile might pause before responding, waiting for its body to reach an optimal temperature, these newly warm-blooded creatures reacted immediately. A rustle in the understory prompted instant awareness. A subtle shift in scent triggered a faster series of internal assessments. This speed offered survival advantages in a world with increasingly dynamic ecosystems. The early Mesozoic introduced landscapes filled with diverse plant life, ferns, cycads, ginkgos, creating intricate habitats of shade and dappled sunlight. Small endothermic creatures wove through these environments, darting between shadows, navigating tangled roots and dense vegetation with agility that demanded rapid sensory coordination. Warmth kept their minds alert even when the world around them cooled, allowing them to take advantage of moments when predators grew torpid in the night's chill. One of the great strengths of endothermy was the ability to sustain long periods of activity. Instead of short bursts followed by long rests, warm-blooded animals could forage, explore, and defend themselves over extended stretches. Their brains, fueled by steady internal heat, remained responsive for hours on end. This endurance created new patterns of behavior, more persistent searching, more frequent territory patrols, more intricate navigation routes. And these behaviors, in turn, pushed cognitive systems to adapt. Even problem-solving, in its early forms, benefited from warmth. A warmer brain could test options more rapidly. Should it squeeze through that opening? Circle around the obstacle? Climb instead of crawl? These were not conscious deliberations, but rapid-fire assessments made possible by metabolic momentum. Small insectivorous proto-mammals and early avian ancestors learned to exploit crevices, burrows, and canopy layers with a precision that required constant adjustments and fast feedback loops. Endothermy also fostered the expansion of sensory ranges. Creatures that produced their own heat needed more oxygen, more food, and more consistent access to resources. Their brains became more attuned to faint cues, small sounds in the leaf litter, subtle movements in twilight. A quickened sensory system meant the brain was always juggling inputs, a vibration here, a scent there, a flicker at the edge of vision. Handling this stream of information smoothly required neural networks capable of firing in rapid succession without overheating or slowing down. And this too posed evolutionary challenges. Warm brains needed to avoid literal overheating. Increased neural tempo required increased cooling strategies. One reason early birds and mammals developed structures to dissipate excess heat efficiently, from improved blood flow patterns to anatomical adaptations that vented warmth. In a sense, the brain itself influenced the evolution of the body around it, demanding systems that maintained its preferred temperature range. The emergence of parental behaviors also gained momentum in warm-blooded lineages. Warmth made extended egg attendance or guarding of young more feasible. A parent could remain vigilant through cooler hours, reacting swiftly to threats and adjusting its position to maintain clutch temperature. This continuity of activity strengthened early forms of social or cooperative behavior. Rudimentary, yes, but significant. A faster brain, after all, is better at monitoring movement, recalling the layout of a nesting site, or detecting subtle danger cues. Nighttime became especially important. Creatures warm enough to stay active after dusk found a world rich with opportunities. Insects slowed, larger ectothermic predators retreated, and temperatures favored those who carried their own internal furnace. As nocturnal activity increased, new sensory adaptations began to arise. Larger eyes, sharper hearing, more acute smell, and each required the brain to process information differently. The interplay between heat and sensory adaptation became a feedback loop, encouraging brains that could handle complexity at faster speeds. Yet speed does not automatically equate to insight. These warm-blooded pioneers were not philosophers. They were efficient survivors. Their intelligence remained rooted in immediate needs, finding food, avoiding danger, maintaining territory. But the tempo at which they performed these tasks hinted at future possibilities. With faster processing came the potential for more nuanced behaviors, subtle adjustments, and long-term strategies. Endothermy laid the groundwork for minds that could not only react, but eventually contemplate. In the late Permian and early Mesozoic, intelligence didn't take a leap forward. It took a quickening breath. The world's tempo changed, and with it, the rhythm of thought. Warmth carried life into a new cognitive chapter, where brains buzzed a little brighter, senses sharpened a little quicker, and days stretched longer into productive hours. Evolution had discovered the simple truth that warm bodies make active minds, and active minds shape the future in remarkable ways. By the time the Jurassic sun rose over fern-filled valleys and towering conifers, the world belonged to the dinosaurs. Some strode across floodplains on pillar-like legs, others wove gracefully through forests, and still others took to the air in fluttering bursts of movement that hinted at futures yet to come. The earth was warm, lush, and alive with sound, drumming footsteps, rustling leaves, echoing calls. And in this energetic landscape, intelligence continued its slow, steady evolution. Not through sudden leaps, but through an expanding ability to interpret the world in intricate, interconnected ways. Dinosaurs were not simply large reptiles. Many groups possessed sensory systems far sharper than those of their ancestors. Their eyes grew larger, their hearing more refined, and their sense of balance, particularly in the fast-moving theropods, attuned to the split-second corrections needed for pursuit or escape. But sensing the world more clearly demanded something additional, a brain capable of managing the overwhelming flood of information without becoming confused by it. Processing became as important as perception. In many lineages, the brain began to emphasize regions dedicated to interpreting sensory cues, zones that compared motion, assessed direction, and coordinated limbs with startling precision. A predator such as a small maniraptoran dinosaur might stand motionless in the understory, head tilted slightly, triangulating the faint crackle of movement. Its brain would sift through input almost instantly. Was that the sound of a potential prey item? The shifting weight of a larger animal? The whisper of wind through leaves? Decisions like these were brief but meaningful. To survive in the complex Jurassic ecosystems, animals needed not only quick reactions, but the ability to predict what a sound or motion might mean in the moments ahead. This was the dawn of planning, not advanced planning, not strategy in the human sense, but a subtle mental extension into the near future. A hunter might anticipate where a fleeing animal would emerge from a thicket. A herbivore might sense the approach of danger not just from immediate cues, but from patterns of disturbance in surrounding vegetation. Life began to experience time not only as the present instant, but as a thread that extended forward just far enough to matter. One of the most transformative innovations of this era appeared not in brains, but on bodies: feathers. At first, feathers were simple structures, filamentous, fluffy, more like down than flight tools. They trapped heat remarkably well, giving many small dinosaurs and early bird ancestors the freedom to maintain active lifestyles, even when climates cooled or shaded forests offered limited warmth. This thermal stability relieved the brain from the metabolic uncertainty that plagued more temperature-dependent animals. With more reliable internal conditions, neural tissue could operate at a steadier tempo, opening the door to more flexible behavior. Feathers weren't invented for brilliance. but they helped make room for it. Over time, these structures became more elaborate, splitting into veins, barbs, and aerodynamic surfaces. Some species used them for gliding between branches or slowing themselves as they leapt across uneven terrain. Others used them for signaling, flashing bright patterns to attract mates or warn rivals. Each new use demanded corresponding mental adaptability, recognizing social cues, judging landing distances, adjusting movement mid-air. The brain became a more dynamic interpreter of motion, color, and intention. Among early birds and their close dinosaurian relatives, the cerebellum, responsible for coordination and balance, expanded significantly. Life in the canopy or along precarious perches required impeccable timing. A small misjudgment could send an animal plummeting, so neural circuits evolved to refine motor control. Every leap, glide, and landing became a miniature negotiation between gravity, muscle strength, and sensory awareness. This increased reliance on precision rewarded individuals whose brains could integrate sensory information more fluidly, compare outcomes more subtly, and execute more deliberate sequences of action. Predation, too, demanded planning in new forms. Group hunting behavior appeared in some theropods, though the extent remains debated. What is clear is that certain species coordinated their movements based on the behavior of others. Whether through vocalizations, body language, or learned patterns, they navigated their environment in ways that suggested emerging forms of foresight. Even solitary hunters displayed signs of anticipation, stalking prey with patience, timing ambushes, and shifting strategies based on terrain or cover. Herbivores were not exempt from these cognitive shifts. Large sauropods traveled in herds, navigating long migrations that spanned river systems and volcanic uplands. Their survival depended on interpreting environmental signs, seasonal vegetation changes, distant storms, shifting riverbeds. Smaller ornithischians developed social awareness, moving in groups that provided safety through numbers. Recognizing the mood and motion of a herd required a kind of social processing, noting who bolted first, who lingered, which individuals signaled tension. These behaviors laid groundwork for future complexity in both communication and group dynamics. The world itself was growing more layered. Forests of ginkgo, cycads, and seed ferns created vertical ecosystems filled with hiding places, ambush points, and lookout posts. Rivers carved channels that shifted with seasonal floods. Volcanic activity reshaped landscapes, creating temporary lakes and ash-filled plains. Navigating such environments required memory, spatial mapping, and the capacity to adjust behavior based on subtle environmental cues. In many species, brains expanded unevenly, some regions swelling while others remained conservative in size. These specialized expansions reflected each lineage's unique ecological demands. For early birds, regions related to vision and balance flourished. For fast-running dinosaurs, areas tied to coordination and threat detection strengthened. For herbivores that lived in groups, areas involved in monitoring surroundings and interpreting the movements of companions grew more refined. Though dinosaurs were not intellectual giants by modern standards, they represented a significant step in the story of intelligence. They lived in worlds filled with complexity, and they responded with heightened perception, quicker processing, and the first glimmers of behavioral foresight. Thought stretched beyond the immediate moment. For a creature poised to leap, strike, or flee, the future, measured in fractions of a second, became something worth considering. In the Jurassic and Cretaceous, life began planning its moves rather than simply reacting to them. The world had gained depth, motion, sound, and pattern, and the minds of dinosaurs and early birds rose to meet that richness. Evolution was quietly assembling the capacities that would one day bloom into even more flexible intelligence. One feather, one footstep, one anticipatory glance at a time. When the last echoes of the Cretaceous faded and the world entered the early Cenozoic, the earth felt strangely empty but full of possibility. Forests regrew across ash-darkened soils, rivers carved new channels through landscapes once trodden by thunderous giants, and the air, no longer stirred by the calls of enormous reptiles, carried a quieter set of sounds. In this renewed world, small mammals emerged from hiding places that had sheltered them during the upheaval. They blinked into the sunlight, sniffed the altered air, and stepped into niches left vacant by creatures far larger than themselves. Their bodies were modest, but inside them, something extraordinary had begun to stir, a new kind of mind. Unlike the rule-bound intelligence of the reptiles that dominated before them, mammalian intelligence was fluid, sensitive, and quick to adapt. Their brains, already warm, fast, and metabolically expensive, were wired for change. But even more importantly, they were wired for connection. While many dinosaurs had relied on sharp senses and fast reflexes, these early mammals relied on relationships, emotions, and flexible responses to a world that shifted rapidly around them. The Cenozoic dawn was unstable in the best possible way. Climates fluctuated, forests expanded and contracted, mountains rose and coastlines reshaped themselves. This constant flux rewarded creatures that could adjust their behaviors to new conditions. Mammals became experts in improvisation. They explored new food sources, ventured into unfamiliar habitats, and altered their routines with a creativity that earlier lineages rarely needed. Adaptability became a form of intelligence, an ability to survive not by repeating what had always worked, but by noticing what had changed. Their senses mirrored this shift. Mammals heard the world not just as noise, but as a tapestry of meanings. Warning calls, contact calls, subtle cues that signaled safety or danger. Their olfactory systems were superb, allowing them to track companions, offspring, or predators by scent trails invisible to the eye. And instead of reacting solely to immediate stimuli, mammals began integrating experiences across time, forming emotional memories, the comfort of a familiar den, the tension of a narrow escape, the safety of following a trusted group. Emotional intelligence took shape in families. Many early mammals invested heavily in their young, providing warmth, nourishment, and protection long after birth. This extended care created a new evolutionary environment inside the family unit, where communication mattered and where young mammals learned through observation, play, and gentle correction. A mother's concern, a juvenile's curiosity, a sibling's playful nip. These were not just social behaviors, but the scaffolding of a mind capable of interpreting intention and responding to it. Bonding became a powerful form of intelligence. Staying close to a parent increased survival, and remembering the scent or sound of that parent created reliability in an unpredictable world. These bonds also shaped neural development. The young brains of mammals grew within a context of reassurance and contact, strengthening pathways involved in attachment and emotional processing. The result was a lineage capable of caring, not in the human sentimental sense, but in the biological sense of investing energy into others. Caring about things turned out to be surprisingly useful. As forests flourished across continents, mammals diversified. Some took to the trees, developing hands that grasped, digits that curled, and eyes that judged distances with remarkable accuracy. Tree dwellers needed to coordinate complex movements, remember branch networks, and read body language, making emotional and social intelligence even more advantageous. Others roamed the plains as climates dried and grassland-like habitats expanded. Herd-living mammals relied on group awareness, sensing shifts in the collective mood, whether tension, calm, or alertness. This ability required a brain capable of interpreting social cues quickly and adjusting behavior accordingly. Predator-prey interactions also grew more intricate. Mammalian predators stalked with deliberate stealth, adjusting their strategies based on the reactions of their targets. Prey species learned to synchronize their movements and communicate danger through subtle signals. The world was becoming more relational. Actions spread through groups, and individuals responded to one another with increasing nuance. Communication expanded beyond simple calls. Mammals used body posture, ear position, tail movement, scent marking, and even touch to convey meaning. A gentle grooming session or a reassuring sound could calm tension within a group, while a sudden shift in stance could alert others to danger. These interactions required mental flexibility, a capacity to switch from solitude to cooperation, from vigilance to curiosity, from guarding to nurturing. Adaptability also extended to problem solving. Early mammals encountered obstacles that demanded more than instinct. A fallen log blocked a regular path, a fruit tree ripened weeks later than expected, or a nest site disappeared after a storm. Mammals learned to investigate alternatives, climbing over barriers, trying new food sources, or relocating their shelters. This experimentation was subtle in its beginnings, but it represented a significant cognitive expansion, the willingness to explore when routines failed. The early Cenozoic landscapes encouraged this mental versatility. As continents drifted and climates warmed, habitats transitioned between woodlands, savannas, and open scrub. Mammals tracked these changes nimbly, shifting their behaviors and diets in ways that more rigid animals struggled to match. Their brains, sensitive to novelty, emotionally attuned, and responsive to experience, allowed them to thrive in ecological puzzles rather than crumble before them. In these adaptive, relational minds lay the seeds of future intelligence, creatures that would eventually navigate social hierarchies, communicate in complex ways, solve environmental challenges, and develop a mental life where cooperation mattered as much as individual skill. The mammals of the early Cenozoic did not yet possess profound introspection or intricate societies, but they carried within them the emotional frameworks that would shape the evolution of more sophisticated consciousness. As the forests rustled with new voices and soft-footed movement, intelligence awoke in a warm-bodied, social form, quietly preparing the world for the minds that would someday reflect on this very moment in the story of life. The Miocene was an age of widening horizons, literally and mentally. As climates cooled slightly and seasonal patterns strengthened, forests thinned in many regions, giving way to open woodlands, broad savannas, and patchwork mosaics of trees and grass. In these expanding spaces, animals could see farther, roam farther, and encounter more members of their own species than ever before. And where animals gathered, intelligence took on a new dimension. It became social. Living in groups was not a novel idea in the Miocene, but during this epoch, it matured into something deeper and more layered. For mammals, especially primates, early elephants, canids, and certain hoofed species, Life in groups demanded far more than simply staying near one another. It required the ability to recognize individuals, recall shared histories, interpret subtle signals, and anticipate how companions would act in future situations. The mind could no longer operate as an isolated unit. It now functioned within a web of relationships, where each decision influenced others and each moment was shaped by collective awareness. In primate societies, for example, remembering who was friendly, who was dominant, who was unpredictable, and who owed a favor became as important as knowing where food was located. A single encounter, a grooming session, a brief quarrel, a shared watch for predators, left an emotional trace that shaped future interactions. These memories formed intricate social maps that individuals carried with them, updating them constantly as alliances shifted and relationships evolved. Keeping track of everyone else became a full-time cognitive job. Brains adapted accordingly. Regions involved in emotional interpretation, memory, and decision-making grew more refined. Neural circuits strengthened around recognizing faces, decoding expressions, and recalling social exchanges. Primates in particular developed acute sensitivity to eye movement, posture, tone, and rhythm of motion. With every interaction, they practiced a kind of mind reading, not in a mystical sense, but in a practical one. They learned to infer what another animal might do based on what it had done before and how it looked now. This growing ability to predict others' behavior transformed daily life. When individuals moved as groups, their combined awareness meant detecting danger earlier, choosing safer routes, and responding to environmental shifts with more coordinated action. In a world filled with large predators, big cats, ancient canids, and powerful birds of prey, cohesion offered a survival advantage. But cohesion required constant cognitive upkeep, resolving conflicts, reinforcing bonds, and understanding the motivations of companions. Social intelligence also encouraged more complex communication. Vocal calls diversified. Some signaled the presence of a predator. Others expressed frustration, reassurance, or invitation. Calls could differ depending on the type of threat, its distance, or its direction. Expressions and gestures gained meaning. A tilt of the head, a soft grunt, a shift in stance. The language of bodies became a vocabulary that animals learned from youth through observation and imitation. Imitation itself became a powerful learning tool. Young animals, especially primates, practiced movements they saw adults perform, selecting fruit, navigating branches, approaching potential allies, or avoiding certain individuals known to be troublesome. Learning occurred not just from personal experience, but from shared experience. The group became a reservoir of knowledge, and individuals benefited from the wisdom of those who came before them. This shared intelligence meant communities could adapt to challenges more quickly than solitary animals could. When droughts tightened their grip on Miocene landscapes, herds and troops followed seasoned leaders to distant watering holes, remembered across generations. When predators shifted their hunting strategies, social groups adjusted their vigilance patterns, spreading out or clustering more tightly depending on what worked. Each animal contributed a piece of awareness, and these pieces merged into a collective understanding. Elephant ancestors developed particularly strong social bonds. Matriarchs guided herds based on decades of memory, knowledge of migration routes, seasonal changes, and reliable feeding grounds. Younger members learned by watching, absorbing information about their environment through shared journeys. The mind of the herd was not stored in a single individual, but spread across its members, reinforced by constant communication. Canids, too, discovered the power of cooperative thinking. Packs worked together to hunt prey larger or faster than any one individual could manage alone. Success required coordination, flanking, driving, anticipating turns, and responding to signals in real time. Brains attuned themselves to teamwork, valuing synchronicity over individual brilliance. Ungulates formed herds not just for safety, but for decision-making. When a herd shifted direction, the movement often resulted from dozens of small, subtle cues, postural changes, ripples of tension, or the confident steps of experienced individuals. Each member paid attention to the group's emotional climate, whether it leaned calm, anxious, or alert. Decisions emerged from these collective assessments, a distributed form of intelligence that flowed through bodies rather than words. Social living also shaped emotions, affection, trust, jealousy, rivalry, grief. These were not human inventions, but ancient emotional currents that strengthened bonds or tested them. An animal that lost an ally might show visible distress. One that formed a new bond displayed relaxed posture and frequent contact. Emotional depth helped maintain group harmony, reinforcing relationships that held social structures together. The Miocene world was not peaceful. Competition for resources, mates, and territory remained intense, but conflict became more sophisticated. Instead of constant physical fights, animals employed negotiation, displays, vocalizations, or posturing that communicated intent without risking injury. Understanding these signals required mental nuance and the ability to remember past outcomes. Across continents, the march of social intelligence reshaped the animal kingdom. Mammals with flexible, relationship-centered minds thrived in landscapes that demanded cooperation and adaptability. Intelligence no longer resided solely within individual skulls. It extended between individuals, woven into networks of interaction and communication. In the Miocene, thinking became a shared enterprise. A single brain could only do so much, but a group of brains, linked by memory, emotion, and subtle communication, could understand the world more deeply than any one mind alone. Here, amid the rustling grasses and patchwork forests, social intelligence took a decisive step forward, preparing the ground for the even more intricate minds that would someday follow. The late Miocene gave way to the Pliocene with landscapes in transition, savannas widening under shifting climates, forests thinning in some regions, and new mosaics of open grassland, riverine woodlands, and scattered sheltering trees. In these changing environments, certain animals encountered problems increasingly difficult to solve with anatomy alone. Food hid in tougher shells, roots lodged deeper in soil, and predators demanded new strategies. Challenges that once yielded to claws, teeth, or clever movement now required a different approach. And in this moment of necessity, a new form of intelligence flickered to life. The intelligence that lives outside the body. It began subtly. Among early hominins and several other clever species, individuals started picking up objects not as toys or curiosities, but as extensions of their intent. A stone became something more than a stone. A weight that could crack open a seed pod or shatter a nut. A stick became a probing tool for insects hidden beneath bark or deep within termite mounds. At first, these actions were improvisational, performed on a whim by individuals who happened to discover that an object behaved in a useful way when manipulated. But with each success, a new pattern formed. The animal remembered the outcome, repeated the behavior, and gradually improved upon it. Thinking became easier once rocks started doing some of the work. What made this shift remarkable was not just the use of objects, but the way it altered the mind. For the first time in evolutionary history, intelligence extended beyond the brain and body. A creature could solve a problem not by evolving sharper teeth or stronger limbs, but by manipulating something separate from itself. A stone could apply more force than a hand. A branch could reach farther than an arm. Problem-solving no longer depended solely on anatomy. It now depended on imagination, the ability to envision how an external item might behave when wielded. This new kind of thinking required mental planning. Before using a stone to break open a nut, an early hominin had to choose the right stone, carry it to the right location, position the nut, and strike with appropriate force. These steps wore grooves in the mind, forming sequences that demanded attention, trial and error, and refinement. The mind stretched into the future, holding in it not just an intention, but the steps needed to fulfill it. The act of using a tool was simple. The coordination behind it was revolutionary. Tool use encouraged patience, a virtue surprisingly uncommon in the animal kingdom. Instead of abandoning a stubborn food source, a tool-using creature paused, experimented, and persisted. The reward for that patience, nutritious kernels, insects otherwise out of reach, or sturdy shelters, reinforced the behavior. Over generations, mental pathways strengthened around problem-solving, fostering curiosity, persistence, and a willingness to manipulate possibilities rather than accept limitations. In some species, the innovation spread socially. Young animals watched their elders select stones of specific shapes, observed how they wielded sticks at precise angles, and mimicked the behavior. Learning tools not only required imitating movements, but grasping the purpose behind them, a deeper layer of understanding. The knowledge wasn't encoded in anatomy, but passed through interaction and example. Intelligence, once contained within the individual, began to circulate among members of a group. This externalization of mind, intelligence expressed through objects, changed the pace of adaptation. Evolution had always relied on trial, error, and slow anatomical refinement. But now, ideas evolved faster than bones. A group might discover a more effective digging stick one season and teach it to the next generation without waiting thousands of years for biological changes to catch up. Culture, in its earliest and simplest form, took root in these behaviors. Modifications built upon previous innovations, shared within communities. Tool use also reshaped perception. A hominin scanning the landscape no longer saw stones as background debris, but as potential instruments. A fallen branch was not merely clutter, but an opportunity. The environment became a toolkit, filled with objects that held secret abilities if only the mind could unlock them. This shift in perception, seeing the world in terms of affordances, not just obstacles or resources, required a deeper layer of cognitive mapping. Even animals, not destined for complex tool traditions, experimented with rudimentary object use during this era. Certain birds used stones to crack shells. Some primates exploited leaves as sponges or nets. But it was the early hominins who pushed this behavior furthest, gradually transforming it into an evolutionary engine. The brain did not need to grow dramatically overnight. It simply needed to reorganize around the demands of planning, coordination, and experimentation. And as brains adapted, tool use expanded further, forming a feedback loop that nudged cognition forward step by step. With tools came new forms of cooperation. One individual might hold the object steady while another struck. Others gathered around, observing, learning, and occasionally contributing ideas through gestures or vocalizations. Shared tasks fostered communal awareness. The group became a workshop where knowledge spread freely, strengthening bonds and creating a shared sense of problem-solving potential. Being able to alter the environment also changed the way animals responded to threats. Instead of fleeing from every predator encounter, some species could now fortify shelters, use branches defensively, or create noise-making objects to alert companions. The world grew more negotiable, less of a rigid system to be endured, and more of a dynamic environment that could be shaped by intention. For early hominins, tools became a bridge between thought and action, between need and solution. They allowed minds to wander farther into the realm of possibility, to imagine outcomes before they existed, to hold an idea long enough to test it. In this expanding cognitive space, intelligence stopped being a set of reflexes or social strategies alone. It became a conversation between the brain and the world, mediated by objects that transformed both. By the Pliocene, the creatures who wielded tools were no longer simply responding to their environments. They were modifying them. And in doing so, they opened the door to a level of mental flexibility that would shape the chapters of intelligence yet to come. As the early Pleistocene unfolded, ice advanced and retreated across continents in rhythmic cycles, sculpting new landscapes and forcing many species into patterns of movement and adaptation that shifted from generation to generation. Grasslands spread, forests contracted, and the climate swung between harshness and opportunity. In this world of constant change, a new form of intelligence began to take root, one that allowed knowledge to survive even when individuals did not. It was here that teaching emerged, and with it, the ability for information to outlive its origin. Learning had always existed. Animals watched, imitated, and experimented. But teaching was something different, an intentional shaping of another's understanding. It was guidance, offered not by accident, but by design. And in the early Pleistocene, within certain hominin groups and a few other highly social species, this intentionality became a quiet revolution. The earliest teaching moments were likely simple: a parent nudging a youngster toward a safer path, slowing their own movement to demonstrate how to navigate treacherous terrain, or deliberately repeating an action when they sensed the young one was watching. These acts were not lectures or structured lessons. They were demonstrations guided by awareness. The adult understood, at least implicitly, that the learner needed help. The learner, in turn, responded with attention, curiosity, and the capacity to remember. Evolution discovered the efficiency of not reinventing the same mistake. Mistakes, especially in a challenging Ice Age world, carried far higher costs than before. A single misstep near a frozen lake, a poorly chosen shelter site, or an incorrect handling of a tool could mean injury or death. But a mistake avoided by one individual could be avoided by many, if only the knowledge was shared. Teaching allowed this to happen. No longer did each new generation need to painstakingly rediscover every tactic for survival. Instead, they inherited a living library of behaviors, passed gently from one mind to another. This transfer of knowledge required more than physical demonstration. It demanded emotional attunement, patience, and the ability to sense when another individual was confused, hesitant, or ready to try. These subtle cues strengthened social bonds. Adults grew attentive to the needs of their group members, and youngsters became sensitive to hints and signals that guided them. Communication, in turn, deepened, Gestures gained meaning. Vocalizations gained nuance. A soft sound could redirect a learner's attention, while a relaxed stance indicated success. Teaching made social cohesion not just beneficial, but essential. Tool use became one of the greatest beneficiaries of teaching. Early hominins didn't merely hand objects to one another. They demonstrated how to hold them, where to strike, and when to adjust. A stone flake made improperly could shatter, but one shaped with guidance created sharper edges that unlocked new possibilities. Teaching made craftsmanship reliable. Skills that once took months of trial and error could now be absorbed in days or weeks. The young became competent earlier, freeing time to practice, refine, and innovate. Foraging techniques also passed through instruction. Elders guided youth to seasonal feeding grounds, pointing out which plants were safe, which were bitter, and which only become edible after special preparation. They taught the timing of migrations, the paths that wound around ice-laden regions, and the subtle shifts in animal behavior that signaled the presence of predators. These lessons turned landscapes into shared maps, woven from generations of collective experience. Even social structure benefited from teaching. In groups where hierarchy, cooperation, or caregiving mattered, older individuals modeled appropriate behavior. Young ones learned how to resolve conflicts with minimal damage, when to share resources, and how to support injured or vulnerable members. These lessons stabilized groups, allowing them to function as cohesive units capable of facing environmental challenges together. Teaching also influenced how individuals perceived time. A creature who teaches must think not only of the present moment, but of the learner's future, what they will need to know later, what dangers lie ahead, what opportunities might arise. This slight extension of awareness into the future enriched cognitive life. Thought was no longer confined to immediate needs. It incorporated intention and foresight connected to relationships. As teaching became more widespread, a new kind of memory formed: cultural memory. Knowledge ceased to be confined to a single lifetime. It accumulated, season after season, layered like sediments deposited by a river. Practices refined over decades could now be passed to individuals who had never faced the original circumstances that shaped them. This gave groups resilience. Even when environments shifted abruptly, as they often did in the Pleistocene, communities could draw on pooled wisdom to adapt quickly. Teaching reshaped the relationship between elders and youth as well. Older individuals, no longer defined solely by physical capability, became repositories of expertise. Their experience had value beyond their strength. Youngsters approached them for guidance. Groups relied on them during uncertain times. This social respect created incentives to maintain knowledge, preserve stories, and repeat practices that ensured survival. Intelligence, for the first time, was not only inherited genetically, it was inherited socially. And in the background of all this, emotional intelligence deepened again. Teaching required empathy, a sense of another's perspective, of their confusion or curiosity. It required patience, the willingness to repeat actions until understanding formed. It required restraint, knowing when to intervene and when to step back. Through these acts, minds grew more interconnected, relationships more meaningful, and communities more stable. The early Pleistocene did not invent genius. It invented continuity. Intelligence was no longer a spark that flared within a single lifetime and vanished with its owner. It became a flame carried from one generation to the next, preserved and nurtured by those who held it. Here, in the cold winds and shifting grasslands of the Pleistocene, intelligence learned something profound. Knowledge is far too precious to leave to chance. And with that realization, the story of the mind changed forever. As the late Pleistocene settled across the planet, ice sheets advanced and retreated like slow, shimmering tides. Vast grasslands rippled under cold winds. Rivers braided through valleys sculpted by glaciers, and clusters of early humans and other cognitively advanced animals moved across these shifting landscapes with a kind of attentiveness the world had never seen before. It was not simply awareness of danger or opportunity, nor merely recognition of companions or tools. Something new was unfolding within certain minds, something that turned inward as easily as it turned outward. This was the quiet emergence of self-awareness. Up to this point in evolution, intelligence had largely been shaped by the demands of survival, escaping predators, finding shelter, raising offspring, learning skills, and transferring knowledge. But in the late Pleistocene, minds began weaving together capacities that had matured across countless generations. Memory, imagination, emotional depth, planning, and communication. These abilities, once threads running parallel, began to braid themselves into a richer, more introspective form of consciousness. At first, this reflection was subtle. A human ancestor gazing across a frozen plain might have experienced not just sensory input, the brightness of snow, the distance of a mountain, the smell of cold air, but a moment of inner noticing. They might sense themselves as the one doing the seeing, doing the thinking. This awareness wasn't accompanied by words or theories. It lived in quiet flashes of understanding. But each flash mattered. It hinted that the mind was not just reacting to the world, it was becoming aware of its own presence in it. Thinking about thinking proved both powerful and occasionally inconvenient. Self-awareness allowed individuals to replay memories not merely as stored information, but as stories colored with emotion and meaning. A successful hunt was not just a lesson, it became pride, reassurance, or motivation. A narrow escape evoked fear, caution, or even a haunting ache that lingered long after footsteps faded in the snow. Minds no longer carried experiences as rigid data points. They carried them as interpretations. Reflection softened some memories and sharpened others, making the inner landscape as complex as the external one. With introspection came questions, not verbal questions at first, but mental openings. Why did the river freeze later this year? Why did the hunted animal behave differently? Why did a companion falter with an injury that seemed small? These early inquiries were not scientific yet, nor philosophical in the modern sense. They were simply signs that individuals could project their thoughts beyond immediate needs, holding ideas long enough to compare, contrast, and reconsider. This new reflective intelligence also deepened imagination. Early humans could envision not just the next step in a task, but future situations that had never occurred. They could picture themselves walking into a valley they had never visited, imagine where herds might travel as the seasons shifted, or rehearse sequences of actions before performing them. Planning stretched farther into the future, hours, days, and eventually entire seasons. The mind, once tethered to the present, now roamed freely across time. Such mental wandering influenced social life as well. Self-awareness enabled richer relationships. Individuals recognized not only the emotional cues of others, but their internal significance. A companion's grief after a loss prompted comfort. A child's enthusiasm prompted encouragement. These interactions were not mechanical. They were infused with empathy, shaped by an inner sense of, "I know how that feels." In this way, reflection expanded emotional intelligence, allowing bonds to deepen into something more nuanced than instinctual attachment. Community traditions flourished under this growing sense of self. Early humans created ceremonies, rituals, and symbolic acts, gestures not aimed at immediate survival, but at collective meaning. Paintings appeared on cave walls, etched and colored by hands that sought to record more than events. They recorded interpretations, experiences, and emotions. The makers of these images were not just depicting animals or hunts. They were expressing something about their relationship to the world. Art became an external reflection of an internal experience. Tools, too, evolved under the influence of introspective minds. Stoneworkers planned steps ahead, imagining the shape they sought before striking the rock. Builders of shelters tested new structures in their minds before committing energy to constructing them. Even travel routes became mental creations long before they were physical ones. The world became a canvas for ideas, shaped by plans that extended deeper into time than any previous creature had attempted. Of course, introspection brought challenges. A mind aware of its own thoughts could dwell on uncertainties. Where will food come from when winter deepens? What if the herds do not return? What if a loved one falls ill? Worry, anticipation, and hope became companions of the reflective mind. Evolution had unlocked a powerful tool, but one that sometimes turned inward with relentless energy. Despite its complications, self-awareness provided profound advantages. It allowed groups to prepare for rare events, adapt swiftly to unusual circumstances, and respond creatively to unfamiliar challenges. Reflection turned chance encounters into structured knowledge and transformed fleeting experiences into lasting wisdom. Other species showed glimmers of this introspection as well. Certain large-brained animals, elephants, dolphins, some birds, displayed signs of recognizing themselves in water reflections or responding to complex emotional scenarios with sensitivity. While their consciousness did not mirror that of early humans, they too carried threads of self-awareness, woven differently, but present nonetheless. As the Late Pleistocene unfolded, consciousness expanded from a tool of survival into a companion of identity. Minds no longer simply navigated the world. They pondered it. They pondered themselves. For the first time, life on Earth contained creatures who could sense not only the cold wind on their skin, but the quiet stirring of their own inner voice. And in these reflective moments, whether staring into a flickering fire, tracing patterns in the dust, or watching the slow arc of stars across a winter sky, a new dimension of intelligence took shape: the ability to wonder. Today, when we look across the living world, intelligence reveals itself not as a single achievement, but as a vast constellation, with each species illuminating a different facet of what a mind can be. Forests hum with creatures solving problems no one witnesses. Oceans brim with beings whose curiosity surfaces in fleeting glimmers. The sky carries migratory patterns, etched not in thought alone but in instinct shaped by eons. Everywhere on Earth, minds, large and small, ancient and newly shaped, are engaged in an ongoing experiment, continuing a journey that began long before neurons ever gathered into clusters. Modern intelligence is not a pinnacle. It is not a crown placed upon one species, nor a ladder with rungs rising toward an imagined summit. Instead, it spreads outward, branching endlessly like the roots of an ancient tree. Each lineage refines the kind of intelligence it needs, shaped by the particular demands of its world. A crow does not think like an octopus. A whale does not solve problems like an ant. Yet each carries its own sophistication, honed by quiet pressures and patient selection. In coral reefs, octopuses slip between rocks with uncanny grace, exploring crevices, manipulating shells, and testing objects with delicate suckers. Their intelligence is intensely tactile, an entire body capable of sampling textures, pressures, and chemical traces. These creatures learn quickly, escape obstacles with ingenuity, and even seem to show fleeting signs of preference or play. Their minds, distributed through 8 arms and a central brain, remind us that intelligence does not require a familiar blueprint. It simply requires a challenge and a way to meet it. On open savannas, elephants navigate vast distances guided by memories older than many trees they pass. Matriarchs lead herds to waterholes remembered from droughts generations before. Their communication travels through vibrations in the ground, through gentle rumbles and touch. Their intelligence lies in relationships and long-term planning, an emotional and spatial wisdom passed from one trunk to another. In the forests, songbirds refine melodies that thread through branches like living threads. Their songs change, adapt, and sometimes borrow motifs from neighbors. These vocal languages shift from region to region, almost like dialects, revealing a form of cultural transmission that thrives in feathers. Tool-using birds sculpt hooks from twigs or drop hard nuts into traffic lanes for cars to crack open. Their intelligence is inventive, practical, and sharply tuned to opportunity. Beneath the waves, dolphins and whales display social intricacies woven from generations of interaction. Pod members coordinate hunts, tend to one another's young, and share information about shifting currents or distant feeding grounds. Some even pass along traditions, unique behaviors performed only in certain family groups. Their mental worlds are shaped by sound, layered clicks, whistles, and low-frequency pulses that map their surroundings in detailed acoustic relief. Even insects, often overlooked in discussions about intelligence, reveal remarkable abilities. Honeybees communicate the location of distant flowers through dances that encode distance and direction relative to the sun. Ant colonies operate with a level of coordination that rivals the most efficient human systems, solving problems collectively without any single individual understanding the whole pattern. Their intelligence is emergent, a shared phenomenon that arises from many small interactions. And then, of course, there are humans. Our minds carry the deep heritage of every chapter before us, the reflexes of ancient swimmers, the sensory awareness of early hunters, the bonds of social mammals, the hands that shape objects, the curiosity that seeks meaning, and the introspection that turns inward as often as it scans the horizon. Human intelligence is powerful, yes, but it is not solitary. It is one branch among many, shaped by specific needs: language, long-term planning, symbolic thought, cooperation on unprecedented scales. It is not more real than the intelligence of other species. It is simply different, sculpted for tasks that our ancestors found essential. What makes the present era remarkable is not that humans sit atop an intelligence ladder, but that we are one of many minds exploring what intelligence can become. Some species evolve deeper emotional bonds. Others refine navigation or develop new strategies for survival in altered climates. Intelligence continues to adapt, responding to the rapid changes reshaping our world. In ecosystems under stress, flexibility becomes crucial. Species that can adjust, experimenting with diets, shifting ranges, altering social behavior, display the next steps in cognitive evolution. Even within our own species, intelligence is diversifying. People think differently, learn differently, create differently. Our modern world values many kinds of problem solving: artistic, analytical, empathetic, spatial, musical, interpersonal. This mirrors the broader truth of nature. Intelligence flourishes in diversity, not uniformity. As we move forward, the story of intelligence is expanding beyond biology. Machines begin to exhibit forms of pattern recognition and learning that echo, in faint outlines, the logic of natural evolution. Though artificial minds are shaped by human design rather than ecological pressure, their emergence adds another branch to the ever-growing tree of possibilities. The experiment continues, now in new arenas: digital, neural, hybrid, each exploring what it means to sense, interpret, and adapt. Yet for all these complexities, the heart of the story remains simple. Intelligence is not a fixed destination. It is an unfolding process, shaped by environments, interactions, and the deep currents of time. It bends and branches, solving problems in ways that reflect the landscapes where it grows. From worms that respond to faint vibrations to birds that teach their young the songs of their ancestors. Every mind participates in this grand experiment. Evolution hasn't finished thinking about intelligence yet. The Earth is still full of unanswered questions, shifting climates, new relationships, and emerging challenges. Somewhere, in a reef or forest or open plain, the next quiet innovation is already forming. Small, subtle, unnoticed for now. And like every chapter before, it will shape the minds that follow, weaving another thread into the vast tapestry of life's ongoing attempt to understand itself and the world around it.